Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another session of DWP. My name is Kevin, and I'll be your moderator for tonight. Tonight's session is part 3 of the Devolution series. Our topic for tonight is why the relationship between decentralization and service delivery is so complex. We have a special guest joining us tonight who will be presenting on this topic. We have Conrad Jerrie Gotora, son of Chief Chinamora, a local government specialist who is the immediate past president of ZILGA and UCLG Africa representative. He was a member of the COPAC Constitution making team from 2009 to 2013, which produced the current constitution of Zimbabwe. He has worked both in rural and urban local authorities and a former chairman of Campfire Program in Zimbabwe and the regional CBNR program. Without further ado, I welcome Mr. Conrad Gotora, our speaker for tonight. Welcome, Mr. Gotora. You can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me to take part in this very important discussion. Now, we are looking at decentralization and service delivery, and we are looking at why it is such a complex phenomenon in the governance of nations, not just Zimbabwe, but all over the world. Now, decentralization is a delegation of authority and responsibilities from central government to lower tiers of a government. Now, these lower tiers depend on the way a country is run. First and foremost, let me go back to before the modern day electoral systems or governance systems. Firstly, we had African cultural states which were run by people we called Mambo or king in English, which has now been turned into chief. Now, a chief presides over an area unelected. He is or she is appointed by a tribe in which he belongs, and that tribe governs the given area. Now, below the chief, there is what we call Abalisa in the valley or Machinda in Shona. Below that, there is another structure which we call Usobuku or Sabuku, or in English, village heads. That's a decentralized governance system by culture. But unfortunately, when the whites came into Africa, they abolished most of these things and centralized all the power. Now, in that context of traditional governance, things were decentralized. The chief was right at the top, and he was governing as the central government of a given particular area. Now, he then decentralized certain functions to the headman or to Abalisa or to Machinda. And a Machinda or a headman was given an area which in modern day we can call a region or a province. Below the headman, there is a village, which in modern day we can call a ward. Now, these were governing structures which were given specific responsibilities by the chief. And the chief never interfered with what was happening in the headman's area or in the village head's area, albeit in a very remote way where cultures were then supposed to be managed by these 3 levels, that is the village head, the headman, and the chief. Now, the village head ran his village almost independent of the headman. And the headman ran his area or her area almost independent of the chief, but taking into account rules and regulation as given by the chief. And these rules and regulations were, were given in such a way that they were not written anywhere. They were just rules and regulations which were passed from generation to generation, which we may call, these rules were not made, but they were invoked. Since they were invoked, we then had to rely on the memory of the elders or the memory of the intelligent people in a given area. Once that is done, the headman reported to the chief on pertinent issues. But the chief has decentralized some of those functions. The headman will only go to the chief to confirm certain cultural activities or certain boundaries of the given area. Likewise, the village head had to do the same to the headman, consulting only on pertinent issues. Now, these responsibilities also went with the privileges. There were privileges of being a king or a chief. Likewise, there were privileges of being a headman or a mulisa. Now, what are these privileges? The privileges were that when you go to the king, you had to pay or give certain things for you to attend the chief's dare or court. Likewise, when the headman was presiding over his court, there were certain things given, not in monetary terms. Maybe these were goats, chicken, horse, axes, spears, and anything of value during those times. And likewise, the same thing applied to the village head, who also had these privileges accompanying the roles that he had to play. Now, in the modern day, if we can now come to what is happening today. What is happening today is that the governments of the Europeans centralized all the power, even the powers of the chief, they then got centralized in central government. And those chiefs became literally messengers to move between the central government and the people and the chief's people. Now, once that was done, what it literally meant is the chief did not have any powers. When he or she wanted to do something, they had to ask for permission or to ask for information from the center, that is from central government. Now, in the modern day context of governance, there is an elected central government, whether it is a unitary state or a federation. Still, they are centralized functions. Those functions were then supposed to cascade down to the ordinary person through what we may call agencies of central government. Those agencies were central government officials or officers who then had to go right down to the individuals. And those agencies, again, did not have their own independent powers. They had powers as delegated powers by the center. Now, the center made all the decisions, whether these were developmental decisions, whether these were social decisions, whether these were economic decisions, whether these were defense or military decisions, security decisions, all was made by the center, and the center only had agents below it who did not have any entrenched powers, if I may use that term. Once those powers were given, they could easily be withdrawn by the center. And the center did whatever it wanted to do. Now, in devolution, there are various forms, in decentralization, that's how it operates. But in today's world, the world is demanding devolution as compared to decentralization. Decentralization just meant decongesting the center and sending things to the periphery, but still controlled by the center. Now, we then go to the next thing, which I think is very important for this debate. The thing called devolution, which is a stronger way of giving powers to lower tiers of government as opposed to decentralization. Now, devolution means the transfer of governmental powers to subnational levels of central government. In this case, we are talking about states where we have federal systems of government, or provinces where we have where we have unitary governments, or regions. In other countries, they call them regions. Then below the provinces or below the regions, there are districts. And these districts then formed the lowest level of governance. However, in some countries, like in Zimbabwe, in 1984-85, there was what was called the then Prime Minister's Directive to decentralize governance powers or governance activities to the village, which therefore meant we had a fourth tier of governance in Zimbabwe. But this was not in an act of parliament. This was also not in the constitution of the country. And therefore, it became difficult to operationalize because the center still wanted to retain and maintain authority over these areas. But come the 2013 election, sorry, not the election, but the constitution. The constitution then created a devolved system of government. The devolved system of government then created three tiers of governance. And these are the center, which is the top, and then the what we call the provincial metropolitan councils in between. And below those, there were now local authorities, be they urban or rural. Now, these were given specific functions in terms of the 2013 constitution as given in the Constitution of Zimbabwe, chapter 14, section 264. There were functions given to the to these lower tiers, that is the province and the district. Now, what does that mean? It means the central government had to devolve certain functions. Now, certain powers, not functions, certain powers. These were political powers, and there is political devolution. Then there is another form of devolution, which is the administrative devolution. Then there's fiscal devolution. And finally, there's the market type of devolution, which was to govern or to control the industries, the business, and the what have you, so that the people could be in business. Now, if you look at the Constitution in section 260, 264, it actually says it can only give those powers to local authorities that have the capacity to do the devolved functions, which means those local authorities which they did not have the capacity remained under the principle of devolution where it had agencies of central government doing the work in that particular local authority, and making sure that the local authority is capacitated to be able to deliver the services efficiently and sustainably in any given area, which therefore means for now certain areas are only getting fiscal devolution. And the fiscal devolution that we are getting at the moment is such that the central government is trying to make sure that those areas which were underdeveloped got an amount of money which government is calling equalization grants, in addition to the capital development grants. These capital development grants are given in terms of the Constitution, Section 301, which guarantees that there is a minimum amount of money from fiscus, which central government must give to the devolved governance structures, which means the province and the local authority. Now, what we are talking about here is that government has realized that it is far away from the people. When it is far away from the people, it does not on a day-to-day basis see or understand the developmental needs of the local people or the social needs of the local people. Therefore, the Constitution in terms of devolution is giving power, it's empowering communities to make sure that communities have the capacity and the ability to plan their own economic development, developmental projects like clinics, roads, and what have you. It also had the right or the capacity to manage their own natural resources sustainably, so much that those resources are improved for future generations. Now, the current fiscal devolution, which is being given to local authorities at the moment, is attached to what the local people will have decided in terms of their developmental needs. These, you will find, are also complemented by central government activities. Let me give an example of roads or dams. Government still retains the power to work or develop or construct what we may call international roads or state roads. It doesn't matter where those roads are, whether they are in a province or they are in a district, government still retains the right to work on those roads or to maintain those roads. Now, given that scenario, it means on the ground, there are still two authorities working there. That is the center and the district. But it's not taking away the rights of the communities in making their own plans and their own priorities. And those priorities are then put in such a way that the provincial level will know what the priorities of a given area are, and the center will also know what the priorities of a given area are. Hence, the central government, in terms of the Section 301 of the Constitution, will be able to determine how much money is devolved to the local authority for the people at this local authority level to decide on how best to use those funds. Now, this is a very tricky situation, like you rightly say that it is a tricky and complex situation. The center, like I said, is for now the holder of the purse. And the center is the holder of the formula on which the money is calculated to be given to any of the 92 local authorities in Zimbabwe. And the 10 provincial governments, if I may use that term again, then the center will decide how much is to be devolved to the province and to the districts. Now, these lower levels of governance, they have also been given powers to legislate in their own given areas of jurisdiction and to correct revenue and also receive grants from the national government. So the center is still collecting the bulk of the money in form of taxes. And the locals only have powers to tax, say buildings, building taxes. They have also powers to collect clinic or school fees in their own given areas. They also have powers to allow people to come and do tourism activities in their areas for a fee of a given concession. Now, what it means is that government has devolved powers which were originally held by the center, but going to the people through a decentralized fashion. But now it has been devolved so that we have effective and efficient service delivery in local authorities. But the question now is, why should we devolve if decentralization was doing something? Now, in some countries, devolution is coming for different reasons. Now, these could be racial, this could be regional, this could be religious, this could be ethnic reasons why government is devolving. So it is devolving only to make sure that they ameliorate the anger of the people in those areas. Like, for instance, if you go to Sri Lanka, you find that there are religious problems. Indonesia has got its own issues. Nigeria, Ethiopia, Finland, Spain, Italy as well. Those have got their own reasons, but the reasons we are finding in Zimbabwe are not tribal. That's why you find Zimbabwe remains a unitary state. And also that's why you will find that the chapter which is talking about devolution is also having its own preamble, just to make sure that people understand that this devolution is not about secession. It's not about creating new states. It's not about creating new countries. It's just about getting the right powers for people to plan and manage their own development. Now, if you go to the majority of countries where these devolved powers are in unitary states, in some countries, they are very easy to change because they are not constitutional, like it is in federal states where there are constitutions guaranteeing the devolved kind of government. However, once the devolved system of governance is in the constitution, it's not the decision of the central government to withdraw those powers and rights willy-nilly. It has to seek the agreement of those levels of government that will be affected by the abolition of those devolved functions. But then it's not just the units of government that will be consulted. It has to go for a referendum. In the referendum, it is the general populace will be able to say, yes, let's amend the devolution chapter in the constitution so that we re-centralize. Or no, we don't want to remove the devolution aspect. So we are talking about two forms of devolution here: those that come by way of just an act of parliament, and those that come by way of a constitutional mechanism. Now, if you go to a country like the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom is devolved into four, I mean. That is England on its own, Scotland on its own, Wales on its own, and North Ireland on its own. And these have got their own parliaments. Now, if you come back to Zimbabwe, we have 10 provinces. And these 10 provinces have got their own parliaments, if I can use that term, with a clerk of parliament in a province. Though that person is not called clerk of parliament, he is just called provincial clerk, but it's just as good as calling that person a clerk of parliament or provincial parliament. And they sit as a parliament comprised of elected councillors. And these elected councillors are elected on a proportional representative system. There's no winner take all. It's proportional, dependent on the number of votes given to members of the House of Assembly in a given province. But there is another catch there. The catch there is that those 10 cannot have a chairman from amongst themselves. I'll go to the district later or to local authorities later. They will then, the party with the majority of councillors in a given province will then have again to nominate 2 people in terms of the constitution, from whom the 10 elected councillors will have to elect a chairman. And the chairman becomes a full-time member of the council, becomes a public official, but not a civil servant. Now, the key here is that there are no appointed officials, but they are elected officials at that level of government. This guarantees the community in any given province the right to choose the people who will spearhead development in their own areas. Now, if we go to the district, the country is also divided into 92 local authorities. That is 32 urban and 60 rural. In each of those local authorities, there are also elected councillors who are elected the same time when the parliamentarians and the president are elected. Given that scenario, you will find there is no there is a very complex situation where you find they could either all be male or they could all be female. Now, to balance that, you'll find they came up with a situation where when we come to election of women in most cases, we have what we call the zebra system, where those people who are elected on the party ticket are headed by a woman followed by a man. If they are 10, it will mean there will be 10 men and 10 women. That's balancing the numbers of gender. So there's gender equity at that level. At that level, I was talking about the way provincial councillors are elected. The provincial councillors, which is the provincial government, are elected on what is called the proportional system, which is headed on the list by a woman, followed by a man, a woman, a man, until we have 10 candidates per political party. Now, this makes sure that we have equity in terms of gender representation. Now, Once that is done, we now look at the number of votes cast for members of the House of Assembly in a given province. This then creates the proportions. Where you have more councillors, MPs, you will have more councillors. Where you have fewer MPs, you have fewer councillors as well. But it's a maximum of 10 per province. Now, there appears like there's a duplication of roles at this level. The province is operating in a given province where already there are both urban and the rural local authorities. The problem will come on where is the province going to develop? Where is the province going to create its own money other than to rely on government grants? And these are things that will now be sorted by an act of parliament, which has to be created so that we operationalize this level or this system of government. We are also going to have the same at the district in the coming election, where we will also have proportional representation of women. And they have been granted 30% of the councillors in a given local authority. Let's say there is a local authority with 30 councillors. You will then have to calculate 30% of 30 to have a proportional representation of women in a given area. But the Act of Parliament will still have to come up with the correct powers of the provincial government, because at the moment we have powers granted to the local authorities by way of already an Act of Parliament and the Constitution. So we have a bit of a tricky situation on exactly what the provincial government will be doing. However, they still have to produce their own provincial development plan. They still have to manage natural resources in their given provinces. They will still have to calculate their own GDP in those provinces. But an Act of Parliament will guide them on exactly what it is that the provincial government will be doing. It is very clear for the local authorities because already we know what the local authorities, both urban and rural, are supposed to be doing. They may not be fulfilling their responsibilities properly. That's a topic for another day. But the complication is arising on the powers of revenue generation. The powers of revenue generation in local authorities, that's both urban and rural, have not changed because of the new constitution. In actual fact, the sources of revenue have been enhanced by a guaranteed minimum of 5% of the central government revenue budget, which means they are now actually having more money. What is the problem now is how functional are the elected officials. Now, if you go to rural local authorities, the rural local authorities have what are called ward development committees. Now, the ward development committee is chaired by an elected councillor, but these other members are also elected from what is called a ward assembly. So you find right through from the center to the ward, there are elections taking place, which guarantees democracy and community participation in making decisions and also in planning what they are supposed to benefit in terms of their local authority by way of service delivery. In the urban, unfortunately, we have wards, but they've never practiced ward development committees, though they are mentioned in the Urban Councils Act, but those have never been put to use. That becomes, again, another subject for another day. But we think the new act must clarify exactly how the decentralized structures in terms of the devolution are going to be made similar both in rural and in urban local authorities. But the emphasis here is that there are no appointed central government officials who will run these lower tiers of government, both at the provincial level and at the district level. However, in the event of something going wrong, government can appoint commissioners to run a local authority until the next general election. And also, if something happens, government, in terms of the constitution, is mandated to appoint tribunals to investigate any demeanors by the elected officials, and then central government will make a decision on what it is that should be done. But when parliament is dissolved, local authorities are also dissolved. And because there will be a vacuum, there will be no council. The constitution allows for the appointment of caretaker councillors who will only be in office for a maximum of 3 months. After 3 months, their positions fall away, and perhaps another group of caretaker councillors are also appointed. But we hope and trust that we will never have a situation that will take more than 3 months after the dissolution of the council. And immediately after the elections, the elected councillors assume office within 9 days of being elected. That's when they will elect their committees and elect their chairman. But again, there's another catch there. Suppose the elections are challenged by whether it is opposition or someone else, then that is dealt with in terms of the Electoral Act under ZEC. ZEC will have to determine how to go forward as prescribed in the ZEC Act. Now, there are also areas where there are boards, where there are no wards in Zimbabwe, but there are local authorities which are run by what are called board members, in this case, appointed by central government, which is a very unhealthy situation where government is appointing people to run local authorities. I've got an example here of Lupane board in Matebele North, where it is being run by 3 board members. But it's an unhealthy situation. We also have, I think, the same problem in Mvurwi, which is a 1-ward local authority inherited from Mazoe Road District Council. But in the case of Mvurwi, they had again to have appointed councillors to accompany the one elected councillor in that ward of Mazoe Road City Council. So it a bit complicates the situation of devolution as well as decentralization. So what I'm saying is the constitution of Zimbabwe has devolved rather than decentralized the management of the country. It has completely devolved, and the way it is devolved, it is accompanied by a fiscal transfer from the center, which in my view, the central government is just remaining with the oversight responsibility over these local authorities, because the local authorities have been given by the Constitution operational autonomy from the Constitution, accompanied by acts of Parliament. This enables them to make quick decisions in their own given areas without reference to the sender. Let's look at employment, for instance. In the olden times, you had to get authority to employ from the ministry responsible for local government. In the old dispensation, you also had to seek for permission on what it is that you should do in terms of development in your area. But because of the coming in of the 2013 Constitution, these local authorities are literally having some form of autonomy as guided by the Constitution, Chapter 14 of the 2013 Constitution. That's how Zimbabwe is now currently being administered. I end here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gotora. Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. I now open up the floor to the audience. If you've got any questions or contributions, you can ask Mr. Gotora and he'll respond. So please use your hand reaction emoji and we'll unmute your mic. Yes, Prof.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Gotora, for that.
Thank you.
Fantastic expose. So they what I was wondering, because for Zimbabwe, devolution is a fairly new phenomenon. It came into the 2013 Constitution, and now we're kind of easing into it. From your presentation, it could be one of the things that is kind of almost expected out of devolution is that things begin to happen. There's more effective service delivery, especially at the bottom of the pyramid, right there in the village. And we can see activities in a ward district which really link up directly to the national visions and so forth. Are there any countries that for Zimbabwe should be emulating that have successfully improved service delivery due to devolution?
Thank you, Prof, for that very important question. Like I said in my expose, it depends on whether one country is unitary or federal. There are countries, of course, well, let me not talk about America and Europe. Let me go, zero down to Africa. If you go to Kenya, for instance, and Uganda, for instance, there are situations where after devolving responsibilities, you start seeing or enjoying services that never used to be there. Let's look at the constituency of Kibeira in Nairobi. Before devolution in Kenya, Kibeira was a nightmare to be in. Kibeira was filthy. Kibeira was a jungle. But after the devolution, you'll find there is now a semblance of order in Kibeira. And I think Zimbabwe can learn from what has happened. Let's go to Rwanda again. After their devolution, Rwanda has become the smartest country, in my view, those at least I visited, because I've been both to Europe, Asia, and America, and of course in Africa. But the smartest country I've seen because of devolution is Rwanda. And therefore, we can emulate what they've done. Any more?
Yeah, thank you very much. Magombedze.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, so there was this challenge that I couldn't unmute myself. I only realized the host had control. Thank you very much, Jerry, for this powerful presentation. I just wanted to hear what your feel is with regards to the effect on economic development. You sounded really very positive with regards to social service delivery as a result of devolution. It looks like we now have a bloated structure. If we have the local authority councils in place, and then we have a provincial council on top of that, elected councillors for the district, district level, and then at the provincial level. Is this not a bloated structure? In terms of economic development, do you see this being useful, or it's an extra burden? Over.
Okay, that's a very important question. Until people experience what comes out of certain decisions, people are a bit hesitant to embrace some of those things. Personally, I feel it's not a burden, provided the people are doing the right thing. In terms of local authorities, they must have properly defined local economic development programs as given by the Constitution. It's there. Whether it is tourism, whether it is mining, whether it is manufacturing, whether it is agriculture, they must plan for those things now because they have been given the mandate as well as the power to plan for those things. Now, the province will then come in at those situations, in my view, where you will find it will be too much of a complicated or a mammoth task for one local authority to embark. Let's look at an example of an irrigation scheme where people want to construct a huge dam the size of Tugwimkosi, for instance. One local authority will not be able to do it or to plan it or even to manage it. So the province will have to come up with such huge plans, coordinating the various government agencies at the provincial level so that they deal with matters that the local authority as a single entity will not be able to do. I see that we will be riding on each other in terms of economic development plans, but this requires now the right people to be in the right positions at the right time for us to have a win-win situation. I don't see it as a bloated thing. I actually see it. Remember, we had this before independence where we had provincial councils. Mashonaland East Provincial Council, Mashonaland West Provincial Council. We never had any clashes because at that time, I was working in local government. We never had any problems, be it financial or socially, where people are now stepping on each other's toes. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a good thing. We must actually now make sure that we have the right people, particularly this person that is going to be called the provincial council or the metropolitan council chairman. We don't just need to please each other politically. We must have someone who has the knowledge of governance and someone who has the knowledge of commerce and industry. If it is an agricultural province, we need someone who has agricultural expertise so that he can steer this ship called provincial government. And as far as I'm concerned, we will be able to have a win-win situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Any more questions or contributions? Prof?
Yes, Mr. Gotora,
yes, sir.
I really liked the way you started off, pointing out that before colonization, we had a highly decentralized state system or nations with a village had which also had its own democratic system of discussing issues, and then going on to the next level. the headman, and then to the chief and to the king. Is there any African country that has successfully reintegrated those structures into a system of decentralized local government? And what are the chances of Zimbabwe being able to accomplish that? Thank you. Over.
Thank you. There are complications in combining two governance systems. There are complications. However, countries like Nigeria have tried it. Countries, well, if you look at the South African constitution, which has created a house of traditional leaders and provincial one, government, and they work together. I'm not very sure on how effective it has been, but I think it's the right thing to do, because remember, the community we are talking about, particularly in rural areas, but even in urban areas. For instance, if you go to Madagascar, you'll find a chief presiding over issues in towns. And I don't see why we should not have the same in this country. This is where the constitution is saying an act of parliament must. So it is up to our parliamentarians to see how we can integrate by way of a law. And I don't see it being problematic. I am a product of a combined elected and traditional chiefs councils. When we had the so-called African councils in Rhodesia, we had the chiefs, and they were called the president of the council. And the headmen, they were also part of the council. And the elected people were also part of the elected council. If you read the Rural City Councils Act of 1988-1985, you also find that the traditional leaders had a seat in the council, though unfortunately, they were not allowed to vote. They could sit, contribute, even put an item on the agenda, but still they were denied the right to vote. But I don't see why they should be, they should not be allowed to vote in a debate which they will have participated. But again, another problem arises where you'll find the times in which we are living. I'm not blaming the chiefs here or denigrating the chiefs, because I am a chief myself. I would be very grateful if I can be part of the council. But we have chiefs who are very elderly, who even if you take into council, they won't be able to do anything. Just like, of course, you will find some elderly also elected people in local authorities, but these are in minority. But in a lot of districts, it will then be dependent on the number of the traditional leaders. But in districts like Binga, districts like Mberengwa, where you have lots of traditional leaders in one district, it could be a bit problematic because they may end up being more than the elected. But if you go to districts like Mrewa, where you just have one chief, it won't be a problem. If you go into districts like Goromonzi, where you only have 3 chiefs, it won't be a problem. But where you have too many chiefs, it becomes problematic. I agree with you, Prof. We need to investigate and interrogate a way of combining traditional and modern day governance systems. I believe that will strengthen our governance systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Any more questions or contributions? Please use the hand reaction emoji and we'll unmute your mic. Any more questions or contributions? Okay. I'll hand over back to you, Mr. Gotora, as I would like to close off the session at 7:30, so you could share your final thoughts and your closing sentiments, and we'll then close off the session.
Thank you very much. My closing remarks will be related to our electoral system and the way we choose the candidates from different political parties. We are letting ourselves down by not electing the right people. And by right, I'm not talking about belonging to a church or a political party. I'm talking about electing effective people who volunteer to go and give service to the nation or to the authority. But what I'm seeing at the moment is like these councillors are looking at councillorship as a job where they must go and get benefits. And at the end of the day, instead of them delivering service, they are busy amassing benefits for themselves. And unfortunately, the same elected officials are not capable, or they don't have the stamina to challenge and control the appointed professionals. Let's look at someone who is an accountant, and he is supervised or managed by somebody who doesn't know the difference between a debit or a credit. And that person is supposed to be chairing the finance committee. What do you expect that person to contribute as far as the financial affairs of the local authority are? And again, if you look at the ages of people we are sending into local authorities, again, I'm not denigrating the youth here, but we seem to be having too many youths who have not worked anywhere, who have no experience in anything, and they are now in councils. You'll find where we have some 30-something councillors in a given area. Over 20 are youths who have no background of working, managing, controlling, or even planning. But they come in because they look at it as an opportunity for them to get employed. I also implore government to make sure that the constitution is saying a minimum of 5%. It's a minimum. When we were in COPAC, I was part of COPAC, we had proffered that we wanted 12.5% of the fiscus, just 2.5% below what the health ministry is supposed to get in terms of the Abuja agreement, where they are supposed to have a budget of 15% of the national budget. And I implore our government to make sure that they release more funds to local authorities so that service delivery, development takes place where it must take place, rather than get those developments or services superintended over at national level, at what I call the 16th floor management system, where people on the 16th floor of a building are making decisions of people on the ground floor. That doesn't augur well for service delivery as well as for effective social development needs of a given area. Likewise, local economic development ventures. These are supposed to be known by people who are there, but have experience in planning, have experience in leadership, so that at the end of the day, we develop as a unitary state equally, rather than in a lopsided fashion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gotora, for joining us tonight. Thank you for taking time off your schedule to be with us. That brings the end to our session. Please join us next week as we tackle part 4 of the Devolution series. We've got more to offer. If you've not subscribed on our social media platforms, please do like and subscribe on our Facebook, Dialogue with Prof. Mandi Rukuni, or on YouTube, Dialogue with Prof. Mandi. So you're up to date with our updates and our posts. Thank you very much for everyone for coming out tonight. Have a good night. Thank you.